They are
Hello.
live. Go ahead, go ahead. I want to let that breathe, Matt. Go ahead.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah, hello. Hey, it's another Sunday morning, and more as usual. Again, we're saying a relief more than usual because we can let a lot of the things that have gone by the wayside this week, well, go by the wayside, and we'll pick them back up for conversations after the games. But we have plenty of things to talk about for the games, plenty of things that involve Mr. Dr. Gene Bramall and Mr. Matt Waldman, and so many other things to talk about: injuries, talent assessments, our matchups, as we have a big week 3, and already we are having to navigate the injury gauntlet, Dr. Gene. And I guess the very first thing we have to talk about, a lot of lineup decisions going on this. And I've been making and we're just going to jump right in, no niceties, footballguys.com, yada, yada, yada. Jamal Charles, Niall Davis. We've seen it go from a game time decision to Charles is going to test it out in warm-ups, but is not expected to play. Now, we do know that Charles at times has been kind of got to gnash his teeth and play through stuff. And I've been trying to answer questions about Charles. Well, Charles, just don't play Charles. I think that at this point we can say Charles should be on your bench. Even if Charles is active, I feel like Charles should be on your bench. But Davis is a little tougher. Do you feel like people should just be putting Davis, because it's a late game? That's the complicating factor here. Gene, should people be putting Davis in their lineups as if he's going to start?
I think it entirely depends on what your running back to depth chart looks like. I would lean toward Davis regardless, absolutely, but if Charles is active, there's some risk that he looks better than expected, or Davis suffers an injury, and we see the game script flip to where Charles gets 10 to 15 touches and Davis only gets 5 to 10. It's really difficult to know what to expect, but I think if you're choosing between the two, I'd lean hard to Davis. If you're looking at Davis as your running back two, there's lots of upside there, as we saw against Denver last week, and unless you're looking at another top 15 option, I think it's smart to put him in there and then go ahead and scramble if you're forced to. There's still 5 games, 3 in the afternoon, 1 tonight and 1 Monday night, where you can find a hedge at a running back, wide receiver, tight end position if need be. So leave yourself options if you can, but know that Davis has running back 1 upside in your running back 2 spot, and give it a chance if possible. And we're hearing lots of different things about Charles. Ian Rappaport, who's done a very good job with injuries lately, is saying that it's more of a bruise than a high ankle sprain. I'm not sure how to interpret that. The way in which the offensive lineman fell on Charles' leg didn't look like it would be enough to cause a long-term bruise situation. Will Carroll is saying that he's hearing that it's more of a situation where the bye week is coming up for the Chiefs and there's no reason to risk him, which makes sense because of how well Niall Davis played last week. So, depending on what any of those things, it's good news that Charles got out on the field for back-to-back practices this week. If he sits today, it's not a bad thing. Be happy about that because it means it's very likely to be in good shape for the rest of your fantasy season. If he's out there, then I think he's even a tougher decision than Davis because if they put him out there, they probably do so with the intent of using him, at least in a running back committee halftime. So hopefully we'll get some news before Jay Glazer or somebody else will break some news that they're planning on not using him. But I think knowing that Charles is a game time decision at best, I agree with you, the first thing that you said there, which is don't plan to use Charles today.
And I have Niall Davis as a starter with no Charles active as running back 17 this week. So I think we're seeing eye to eye when you say if you don't have another top 15 option, then leave Davis in. And like you said, you may be able to find, Jonathan Stewart maybe would be out there. And we would look for some other guys in the late games. I don't know.
So
Carlos.
are you hearing some? I mean, what kind of questions are you getting from folks on your Twitter feed and email?
Oh, all
kinds. Davis between, is it that Jonathan Stewart angle, or are they guys, are we looking at using Davis as a running back 1?
People are weighing Davis against options like Rashad Jennings and Ahmad Bradshaw and Terrence West and Joique Bell and Chris Johnson and so on. I think that even somebody like Lamar Miller, who's sure to get the full workload, or Stephen Ridley or Kyrie Robinson, who, their coaches, backfields, but they're heavy favorites. You want to play the lead power back for New Orleans and New England when they're heavy favorites like they are. And I'm trying to, and by the way, I'm answering all the questions not on Twitter, but over at footballguys.com message board, the Shark Pool, and I'm trying to include Niall Davis with an active Charles and Niall Davis without an active Charles as 2 separate options in the answer to the question, because it makes that much of a difference. Really briefly, Matt, just I don't remember if you were as negative on Niall Davis as I was. I know Evan Silva wasn't a big fan either. But as we watch guys play in the pros, we update their files. We see have they worked on some of the things that we didn't like about them and so on. Has Niall Davis improved his standing significantly now that you've got to see him in the pros?
No, I think the real answer is that I always saw Niall Davis as a reserve who could be a kind of a clipboard carrier type of back who's going to show you some good stuff if he gets through to the second level, and I think that's been the case. He's capable of making some nice moves and running tough, but I think the place where he's really shined the most is as a kick returner. I don't see. I look at him and I don't see someone saying he's a great future starter. To me, he's like Ben Tate. People are going to be very excited about the idea because of what they see in relief, but ultimately, when he does find another team, I think you're going to see folks kind of regard him in the way that some people regard Tate. Even though with Tate it was more injury, but Tate's not a special back. He's a good back, but not a special one. And I think people were trying to make Niall Davis into a special back, and he has flaws, and I still think they show.
Okay, we've got tons of things. We got tons of stuff to go through here. Gene, Adam Schefter says Jordan Cameron expected to play. Is he somebody that, because this isn't a leg injury, because this isn't the kind of injury, he could come down on that shoulder and it could be painful. But is this one where we're low? And I'm gonna ask you this question a lot in the next hour, Gene. Is even if he plays, is there a risk? Even if Cameron plays, and if Schefter's saying he's expected to play, let's assume he plays. Is there risk, or is it basically, hey, back to business as usual, Graham, Gronk, and then Cameron leads the pack, and Thomas, and then Cameron leads the pack after that?
Yeah, and understand that my response to these questions today is going to be that it's nearly impossible. Well, it is impossible for me to quantify what that risk may be.
Sure.
Without being there in the room while he's being examined, without knowing what his imaging studies were like, without knowing what sort of progress he's made, I'm doing the best I can with regard to estimates. So yes, the answer to every one of these questions is there's a risk of aggravation today. We've seen it with Jordan Cameron already. He went 5 weeks, 3 weeks, well, close to 5 weeks, 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks of practice in the preseason, and a full week of practice, and then partway through the game in week 1 with this injury before it was aggravated. So yes, absolutely today, after a couple of weeks of rest, it can still be aggravated today. How much will it take to be aggravated? Could it be as simple as him blocking and moving his arm away from his body and doing the things that a tight end would normally have to do? That's possible. Is it going to take another hit driven into the ground in the same way that he was in week 1 for him to come out? That's a little bit more likely. Hopefully, with that extra week of rest that he's had now, 2 weeks from the most recent aggravation, he's at a place where they can pad him up and do some pain management, and he won't have a risk. So, what I put in the morning column this week is I think that the tight end tiers are starting to shake out a little bit. I specifically noted Olsen, Gates, Ertz, and Bennett as a tier that I would probably trust over Cameron today, just given the matchups, the volume that they'll see in the offense, and their talent. But Cameron belongs there. I don't think I would be starting Rudolph, Walker, Paul, and maybe even Larry Donnell over Cameron. I think that's the tier that Cameron is in. He's right in between those two tiers. If you want a little bit higher floor option, go ahead and take the guys that are established and wait to see what you've got in Cameron this week. But I think if he's active, and we're hearing all but positive signs, including the only thing that we got from Mike Pettin on Friday, was that Cameron really did more work on Friday than he has at any point over the past couple of weeks, and they wanted to see how he responded to that Friday night through Saturday, and all signs this morning suggest that he's okay. So that's as good a sign as any that you're going to get, that if you're willing to risk Cameron today, and there's some upside in this matchup, that you can go ahead and do so. But if you've got one of those other options, and there's probably 10 to 12 of them that you can trust over Cameron, I'm fine with you doing that this weekend.
And a lot of people asking on Twitter right now, Ertz, Gates, you mentioned that mini tier that's maybe not quite the Graham, Gronk, Thomas tier, and I would tend to agree with that also, unless you really need upside. But a guy like Gates showed us upside last week. Ertz has upside as a big play downfield receiver. So those guys, Gates, Ertz, Olsen against a weak Steelers defense, I would endorse that. I would endorse not necessarily being super aggressive with Cameron. Now, to give Gene a chance to rest. And by the way, Gene, you have the 1,000-yard stare for national TV. You've got that down pat this morning. I feel like you're looking into my soul. Matt.
Nobody wants that.
No. Hey, good bedside manner. Matt, and we're gonna get Gene's take on both of these on the medical side, but again, I want to appeal to your long-time spot as a talent evaluator because we've got two situations going on here with Arian Foster and with Arian Foster / Alfred Blue and Bernard Pierce / Lorenzo Taliaferro, and we're not necessarily going to get into how, and you can if you want, obviously. I mean, go off on why you might like them today or as waiver wire pickups, one or the other. There's a lot of extraneous stuff here to talk about too, but what I really want to get from you, Matt, is a take on, strictly based on talent, which of these two guys is likely to hit this year, or you get on talent. I don't think either of them are likely to hit.
No, not on talent, but I would say on in fit, I would say Blues in a better situation in terms of fit to be able to make something happen today, especially the fact that they are playing the Giants, and I'm not, the Giants defense isn't weak, but the linebackers are a little iffy, I would say. I think that the offensive line has played well enough in Houston that you can see that there's some pretty decent yards to be had for a running back. And Blue to me is kind of that typical Denver Broncos, Houston Texans downhill running back who kind of nondescript. You plug him in, and he's going to get the job done for you, and he's going to look good. People are going to get excited about some of the things he does because if you can give him a run and start, he's going to break tackles just like any running back in the league should. And I mean, they seem to be impressed with him. Maybe he looks better than what he did at LSU, and there was some question about injury during his career that maybe he's a little bit better off in the same way that Austin Safarian-Jenkins, the tight end for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, had that lingering foot injury as a junior, I believe, or was a senior. I don't remember if it was a junior or senior, but he last year, and he's looked a lot better in camp. When it comes to Taliaferro, I had him rated higher than Blue, but I would say that it was more based on his promise because he was a decent pass catcher. He's kind of a stronger guy, but I'm not so sure this Ravens offense has gotten out of its funk yet, and I don't know if it's going to get out of its funk yet. They lost, potentially its best player a couple of weeks ago. So I think that's a big impact. And also, this offense seems to be working best with what they've done in the past when it comes to matching up their line with a smaller, quicker running back, and Taliaferro isn't nearly as quick as Justin Forsett. So I look at him and I think that it's probably better to go with Blue right now, but neither are folks that you should be like holding on to like they're gold.
Right, and that was why someone asked me about Blue versus Taliaferro as someone to just pick up and stash away, not so much to play this week. And my answer was Blue, and Blue by a decent margin, just because it's the margin of Houston's running game over Baltimore's running game. And I know that Pierce Foster is the starter anytime Foster's playing, and Pierce could conceivably lose his job to Taliaferro, but what is that job really going to be worth? Go, were you going to say something, Matt?
Yeah, I would say Blue and Pierce are fairly similar backs, except for the fact that Pierce is more of a gap style runner stuck in a zone scheme, and Blue is a zone style runner in a zone scheme. So it's also a matter of fit. When you're looking at those two guys, I would probably rather have Blue, even if it were Pierce.
Okay, Gene, I know I don't want to ask you to go too far out on a limb in your crystal ball, but let's say Foster, and all signs are pointing towards Foster sitting today. And this could be one of the situations, unlike the Charles situation, where you're saying, well, good, let him sit. And based on Foster's past, and I know that just like I should have had a VA, I should have listened to Dr. Gene, you were warning people off of Foster unless he fell to the 4th round in drafts. And the first 2 weeks looked like, wow, you're going to get a first rounder for your 4th rounder. Now you have nothing for your first rounder or 4th rounder in week 3. But based on how they're handling Foster, should we feel better about him not playing simply because maybe we just get past this bump in the road? Or is the fact that he's already sitting in week 3 a sign that our worst case scenarios are starting to unfold?
Yeah, well, first, for the record, I want it known that I'm not afraid to look into your soul. You can do that if you like. I'm more worried about me in general looking into anyone's. So, and Anyway, I think it's the latter. Yeah, you're next. I'm worried about Foster already. I would have felt much better about Foster if this was such a minor injury that he would already be ready to go within the week that the injury was made. But we know that's not the case with Foster. I was a little bit sucked in this morning by saying that, what did I write? The consensus this week is one of optimism. Usually a hamstring injury with Foster does not inspire optimism. But Bill O'Brien's words saying that they were just managing his reps this week was enough to me to hope that we'd see Foster, and maybe it was just because of the juicy matchup with the Giants that we were going to get today. But, the fact that he's not able to go today, you automatically and you immediately need to think, well, is this going to become a multi-week injury? Because so many of these soft tissue injuries, be they hamstring, groin, calf, what have you, with Foster, have been. So hopefully this is the Texans exercising some caution. But you guys just spent 5 minutes talking about Blue, Grimes, Ronnie Brown. None of those guys inspire confidence. The Texans are by no means out of any playoff race yet. So for them to be cautious with Foster in a game that they should win and need to win today tells you that he's probably not all that close to ready to go, which then calls into question, what does that mean for week 4 and beyond? Because the Texans' bye week does not come for a while. So this is not them managing him. Hopefully, the Ellington situation, the Charles situation, the A.J. Green situation that we'll talk about, that's not a factor here. If he can't go, it's probably because he can't go. It's not because they're trying to be cautious and manage things. And then we've seen with Foster before. Is it 2 weeks? Is it 4 weeks? Is it more than that? I don't hear anything that makes me think that's the case. He got 3 limited practices in this week rather, so hopefully not. But I prepare for that possibility early in the week with waivers, unless we hear something very positive after the game and the press conferences from Bill O'Brien today.
Okay, so again, just briefly, are we entering the danger zone of something that will have to be managed all year, basically, for Foster?
We've seen that in the past. It's too early to say that for certain. Again, the only reassuring thing about this is instead of him coming back to practice and then missing, and coming back to practice and missing, as he did in the preseason, he did 3 consecutive limited practices this week. That's why I had some optimism in my column this morning. But for them already to be, yes, they'll test him in warm-ups and he's a game-time decision, but yeah, I think you have to worry about that. I don't think that's of high likelihood. I wouldn't say that that's 70% likely, 80% likely, but I think you have to go into early next week planning to not have Foster and then be pleased if you do.
And the Texans are a real contender in the division. Foster is essential. He's, I would say, almost more essential than J.J. Watt, honestly, to this team's prospects. So it makes sense for them to be cautious, but they have to be cautious in week 3. Not a good sign. Real quick, Gene, on this Bernard Pierce thing now, and I don't want to botch her name, and she's an excellent reporter, Aditi Kinbwala, I think. She says 95% chance is what her source says. 95% chance Pierce does not play. We saw him play on last Thursday. At the end of the game, he looked as good as he looked at the beginning of the game. I'm not going to comment on what that means, but what kind of injury are we looking at for Pierce to play out the last game and now be highly doubtful to play the following week?
Well, soft tissue injuries, muscle strains, muscle tendon injuries, and we don't know what this is, but it's a thigh. We don't know. Usually that means quad because they'll usually call a hamstring, and a quad, or a quad a thigh. So it's probably a quad strain that we're dealing with. Whether it's in the middle of the muscle or closer to the knee, it's hard to know. Until there's a lot of inflammation build up in the muscle or some bleeding inside the muscle belly that then becomes a problem with spasms and range of motion issues and kind of shut down the firing of the muscle. That stuff can happen within 24 to 48 hours, and we're kind of in that time frame for Pierce now. So the injury happened on Thursday, got back to a limited practice on Friday, and then you kind of assess things Saturday. I think we were told yesterday when, and I don't remember, is it Fitz-Toussaint or something like, whoever they brought up from the,
yes.
Yeah, whoever they brought up from the practice squad yesterday tells you that they don't expect Pierce to play. So this isn't a surprise. It's possible that they were just doing that as a precaution and they'd see how he felt Sunday morning. But that decision Saturday, the Sunday morning, already hearing early that he's not going to play, tells you that he didn't wake up feeling any better this morning than he did Saturday after his Friday practice. Hopefully this is a short-term thing, and that it was a minor enough injury that they allowed him to test it on Friday, can see that he can't go, and he'll recover for next week. But we've seen Bernard Pierce. He's not very explosive even when he's fully healthy, so something like this can rob him of whatever power and explosiveness he may bring to the table. This just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to put an 85 to 90% Bernard Pierce on the field when you know at the limits of his health, he's at the limits of his upside. So rest him this week, sort of see where we get next week. But this is a good chance for Taliaferro to kind of step up and take a little bit more bite of this offense out when Pierce comes back.
And again, a terrific point there for Gene to bring up about watching a team's actions. Actions speak louder than words. And with Vernon Davis, who we already had Ian Rappaport just providing so much vital information for us, saying Vernon Davis doubtful. And that means that Derek Carrier, I think Beloit, I'm not sure what the name of the small, it's escaping me. Small school guy, ran a 4.51, like a 6'4", 240 tight end. So not a big, massive blocker, but more of a downfield receiver. Matt, you got anything on your file on Carrier? I know this isn't like a running back situation with Pierce where he can get his foot in the door. He's not pushing Vernon Davis out by any means, but deep dynasty leagues, we love our tight end premium leagues. And hey, this week, if you're throwing a Hail Mary at tight end, do you have anything on Carrier, Matt?
Other than what I've seen in games and watching him, he certainly he passes the sniff test when it comes to what you're looking for from a fantasy receiver, and that's being able to make catches in physical coverage. And he showed that he is more than able to do that. He's able to get open down the seam, and when you have someone who has the speed to run those intermediate routes and the hands and the toughness to handle contact, that's pretty much all you need as a basic criteria to say he's worth a start if he's going to get a lot of looks his way. And it seems like that Colin Kaepernick is confident in him, so I would say it is a worthwhile option to take if you need a desperation play or just a bye week option because the matchups aren't great.
And it was Asante Cleveland called at tight end for the Niners. So, and Vance McDonald, the backup, and I think Carrier could be better than Vance McDonald as a receiver already, even though McDonald has gaudy physical attributes, not the best hands. Let's go up to Foxborough, and we're, again, Ian Rappaport already, before we woke up, before even pouring that first cup of coffee, Ian Rappaport reporting that MJD not expected to play. So there you get Darren McFadden, who looked a little more like old Darren McFadden. But, Matt, I want to go back to the other side of the backfield, and we're going to ask Dr. Gene for some insight on Shane Vereen and his shoulder. And Shane Vereen is a guy that has been on the injury report a lot in his career already. We don't necessarily think of him as one of those guys, probably because he's been overshadowed by Gronkowski when it comes to Patriots injuries. But, Matt, a big question around fantasy world today, this week, because it's Oakland, you're seeing a blowout. You're also seeing this team run the ball, not throw downfield as much with Tom Brady, and people are saying, Ridley, Vereen, I'm afraid I'm going to play the wrong one. If you had one of those two Patriots backs today, assuming Vereen is active, how would you be approaching your choices?
I think I have to look at it based on what's gone on the past couple of weeks. So far, Stephen Ridley hasn't fumbled the football, and he's looked good. So I would continue to roll with Ridley, also because of what you just, posed there. When you posit that Raiders aren't that strong of a team, they're likely going to get blown out, and the fact that Vereen is a little banged up. So you look at all of those factors, and it would seem that Ridley would be the smarter play in this regard. And I have to ask Gene this because I just want to needle him in the morning a little bit, and that's the is this really a must-need game for a 2-0 Texans team in a division where the Titans are meh, the Jaguars are horrible, and Indianapolis is 0-2 also?
Yeah, it is. You have to win the games that you're supposed to win in your favor. Get those games in the book, and then deal with whatever happens with Indy and the rest of the tough games on your schedule before. But you can't just slough and expect, yes, the Panthers got away with it with Cam Newton. Yes, the Chiefs might get away with it without Jamal Charles today. But those guys had other options behind that were arguably just as good as the injured player they had. I think, yes, it's a long season, 16 games. We don't know what's going to happen over the next 3 months, but you better be winning the games you're favored in early in the season. That's why A.J. Green is going to play today.
And while you go ahead, just add a little postscript to that real quickly, Gene. Any hesitation, now that he's been listed as probable, with the next bye week coming up, and some incentive for them to rest him if there was any question, is A.J. Green automatic? I mean, if you're saying A.J. Green and you stop people and say A.J. Green.
Yeah, I make sure I'm not on mute there before I get
No.
I'm clicking mute so you guys don't hear me typing in the background here. AJ Green is another one of those Jordan Cameron situations where it's difficult to put a percentage chance on the risk that he leaves the game. Now, this week he made it back to a full practice by Friday. He didn't have a midweek issue where he was out and trying to rest and get ready to go. He's been very adamant all week that he's going to play, and you could see a chip on his shoulder in the video of the locker room where he was taking questions from the media, and they say, "Oh, wait, you've got a bye week coming up next week. Doesn't it make sense to just rest a little bit and feel better and make sure that you come back healthy?" And he said, "No, if I can play, I'm going to play." And part of the reason is, and I don't think he referenced this specifically, but I think, again, the Bengals are at home. They're favored against a lesser team in the Titans. This is a game that, and although this is a different situation, arguably the AFC North is a little bit better than the AFC South. Not arguably, I think it is. You have to win these games when they're there. So I think probably what's happened is Green's a little bit more comfortable on his foot this week. He was able to practice a little bit more. They've probably made some changes to the orthotic that he'll put in his shoe, based on when he was out there at full speed, what part of his foot may needed to be supported or not. And there's probably been some interval healing this week. So I think he's going to play. I would drop him down a little bit. Just recognize that it's very possible that you might not see 10 to 15 targets for Green today. 1, because his foot's bothering him. 2, because they do have the bye week next week. 3, because you can easily write a game script in which the Cincinnati Bengals get ahead early and start pounding the ball with Bernard and Hill as they tried to do last week when they got ahead. And they may not need Green much. They're not going to put Green out there to block. So if the game script says let's run the ball, I don't think you're going to see Green on the field much. You'll see Brandon Tate out there and otherwise. So his floor is a lot lower this week. The ceiling is the same as it always is, but the floor is a lot lower than it's been in the past. So just recognize that he probably doesn't belong in those elite high-floor wide receiver 1 tiers, but I don't know that I'm starting a guy that I've got ranked 20, 25 over Green this week. I think if you're looking at him, anybody else within the top 15 and 20, there's a reasonable decision to be made. Consider making that decision to bench Green for one of those players, but anything else, go ahead and put Green in your lineup and hope for the best.
Yeah, I've got Green number 11 right now to give you folks out there an idea. I mean, you're gonna have to do quite some contorting to tell me a list of receivers that Green would not be on in your starting lineup this week. But going back to that game, Matt, Gene brought it up. The smart game script here with Tennessee getting gashed by the run last week to Marco Murray, with Cincinnati at home, with Cincinnati's defense clicking on all cylinders, is a Hill Bernard kind of day. How far are you sticking your neck out to get Hill into your lineup? Is this one of those ones where even though he's not the starter/lead back, based on how he's playing, based on the potential game script here, he's maybe even a top 20 running back play this week?
I think you have to stay conservative and say that he is a flex play, and that means more like 25 to 30 with the upside to be a top 20 running back this week. And I think you have to look at it that way when you are making your judgments calls between a couple of players. If you have a high-end wide receiver 2 in a PPR league and you have Jeremy Hill, it might lean more towards that high-end wide receiver 2, even though Jeremy Hill might outscore him, and you see that upside available for him. And I think that those are times where you have to look at the compartments of where you rate somebody and say, what's his floor? And if the upside for both of those players with their floor is fairly even, but you have one guy's floor a little bit higher, then you go with that. You go with the guy with the higher floor and the even upside. And if it's more up and down, I would say, it's a more volatile floor and ceiling, then maybe you do go with the guy who might be, maybe you have somebody in there as a wide receiver too, maybe like Deshaun Jackson as an example, even when he's healthy. Sometimes he's a top 5 wide receiver in a week, and sometimes he's barely a wide receiver 3, if that, just because of the nature of his game as a vertical player. Then you might look at someone like Jeremy Hill and say, I know he may only get me 8 to 10 carries in this game if the game script goes awry, but he's probably going to average 4 or 5 yards a carry at this stage, and that's probably just as good, if not a little bit better than Jackson if Jackson has a bad day.
And even though Hill's role makes him seem like a volatile play, when you just look at it on its face, if you dig down a little bit, what I saw last week was they gave Hill his own drives. including getting to finish those drives. So it isn't like one of those situations where he'll make it some work between the 20s and then they're going to go back to Bernard automatically inside the 5. So if you like this game to go by that script, and I do, and a couple of things that I want to go back to again, as Matt talked about, ceiling and floor are very important, and to look at your lineup and look at your opponent's lineup and know, do you need more ceiling or do you need more floor, absolutely is something you have to consider when you're setting your lineup. These rankings are not static in that way. It isn't like always play number 25 over 28. There's definitely some situations you could present to us where we'd say, no, actually, I have him ranked lower, but there's a lot more chance of him hitting the upper reaches of his ceiling than the player I have ranked higher than him. So that is definitely a very important thing to be looking at here. But another thing here, he brought him up, Gene, DeSean Jackson, another shoulder issue. Chris Russell, one of many people, good people covering Washington, a terrific legion of people covering that team, saying that the plan for now is for Jackson to play. And I know we don't like to get into these soft social science kind of things and saying psychologically Jackson playing against his old team. How does that even enter the picture at all, Gene, when you say whether or not he'll play? And then on top of that, whether or not he can be effective enough to be a good fantasy play?
Yeah, I think it absolutely enters into it, especially an emotional player like DeSean Jackson. He's shown us how emotional he is. He said pretty much immediately after the game Sunday that he was looking forward to playing the Eagles today. So I think it has to enter into it. And yes, we're kind of where we are with Jordan Cameron and Dez Bryant and DeSean Jackson is they're all kind of dealing with the same injury, and everybody's pain tolerance is a little bit different. Everybody's injury is a little bit different, even though, we say low grade, mid grade, high grade, but not every low grade injury is the same. There's difference is in how much bleeding is around the injury, how much inflammation happens, healing time, pain tolerance, all of those things enter into it. And we're hearing that DeSean Jackson, I think in another week, probably wouldn't play, but since it's the Philadelphia Eagles, I think he's going to do everything possible. It would not surprise me if he's already had a cortisone shot. It would not surprise me if he gets an injection right at the site today to be able to play, and then he's padded and he tries to go. I think his risk of aggravation is pretty high today, but he's always kind of for me, even in his best weeks, in his best situations, he's always kind of a boom or bust option. And you've got Pierre Garçon there. You've got Niles Paul, who Kirk Cousins looked to often. Alfred Morris may be a bigger part of the game script with Michael Kendricks out today and some of the issues, even though the Eagles' defensive line has been playing pretty well. Sometimes they're up and down against the run. It's a penetrating defensive line. And sometimes that works very well against zone running schemes. Sometimes it doesn't work all that well. If you can get that line moving and find a cutback crease like Alfred Morris does, it's a good situation for him. So I think Jackson is going to play today, although it won't surprise me if he's inactive. I think he's going to play today. I think you're going to see him get fewer targets. You have to look at him as a boomer, a couple of long passes. You're in. If not, then it's going to be one of those 3 catches for 20 yards days, and you're going to wish that you hadn't started him. So, you just had the upside versus floor discussion. Your decision on DeSean Jackson today, after we see whether he's active or not, is entirely dependent on what your lineup philosophy is. If you like that boom-bust upside in your wide receiver 3 slot, then I think this matchup is as good as any for DeSean Jackson. He's going to be motivated, and Kirk Cousins can get him the ball downfield. If you don't want the risk of a 2 or a 3 point day, even in a PPR leagues, then you should not be considering DeSean Jackson today.
So let's go back and examine that a little bit deeper, Matt, because I don't know that I've heard your full take on what you think this Washington offense will look like with Kirk Cousins in contrast to what it will look like with RG3. Now, RG3 can uncork that eerie deep ball, which we had all these visions of DeSean Jackson zooming underneath those and getting long touchdowns. We are talking about ceiling. We are talking about as the main factor in whether you're going to play DeSean Jackson. Leaving the injury stuff aside, just with Kirk Cousins as his quarterback, what is the true ceiling for Jackson? Are we overreacting if we say he has a lot less potential with Kirk Cousins? Is it closer to what he was with RG3?
I would say yes, only because with RG3 right now, RG3 isn't playing like the guy that we saw in the past. So on paper, RG3 would probably be the more advantageous pairing, but Cousins is willing to throw the ball downfield. He's willing to be more of an intermediate passer as well. He's also going to run less, so that means you are going to see more attempts from him. And he's also willing to stand tough in the pocket. But just like RG3, he tends to take punishment while he throws the football. He just doesn't take it the way that RG3 does, like a Hollywood stunt double. He's a little bit more sensible about it. But the problem too is that RG3 is a Hollywood stunt double and gets up and he's tough as nails and all that kind of thing. Kirk Cousins is more that leading man who thinks he's a stunt double until he gets hit in the mouth and throws an interception. And I think that, Cousins is kind of that, he has a tendency to be an interception machine. And I am worried that once we see teams look at the game plan, do a little advanced scouting of him, know that's who they're going to face in the game, they're going to make a little bit, they're going to, be able to prepare for him this week and look at some of his tape and go, here's where some of his issues lie. And then be able to, get pressure on him. And when they get pressure on him, he is more likely to say, I know I can hit this throw. I know I can hit this throw, and then get hit, make the throw, and he does. Hits it right in the chest of the defensive back. So this is, he's capable of a 300-yard day, but he's also capable of a 300-yard, 3-interception, 1-touchdown day. So he's quite a volatile player fantasy-wise, and looking at this, he's smart enough to spot a blown coverage, which could help Deshaun Jackson, week to week. He's also good enough to be able to find some of those dig routes if Jackson will run some of those routes over the middle, but I don't know how much they're going to target him in those cases. But he's also not, he doesn't have that high-end physical skill of quarterbacks where he's going to be able to stand in there tough like Griffin will and get the ball 40 yards downfield on a line.
And I think that this week may not be the best week to test some of those theories just because Philly's defense still is looking like one of the bottom defenses in the league. But we have a lot more matchups coming up to evaluate this. And I want to point out, by the way, the great friend of the show, must listen, Lance Zierlein says, Dear Niall Davis, I know you're starving after sitting behind Jamal Charles, but Miami's defense only has salad for you. And that's a nice picture of a woman eating salad. And I say, you don't win friends with salad. So that's something for all the Niall Davis backers to keep in mind. I wanted to point that out, Matt, because, again, as I go back a couple of takes, game script, when you're looking at your lineups and making your choices, in addition to ceiling and floor, and an important component of ceiling and floor is game script. And I think that this is something, Matt, you talked at length, and I cited at length about the 4 legs of the fantasy football table, draft being just one, waiver wire trades and lineup setting. And then let's look at the lineup setting leg, and it's like a table, Matt, and it has legs. And one of those legs is prognosticating games, is handicapping games. And when you handicap games, that gives you a few game scripts that you choose from to think, well, what's the most likely one? And in this case, matchup and the game script, this game being down in Miami, Kansas City's reeling, says the game script for Niall Davis could be, now granted, last week he was behind the whole week and still put up decent numbers, so he might be a little more insulated from game script as that Jamal Charles role. If he gets it, again, asterisk if Charles is inactive. But I want to go up the coast and inland a little bit to Buffalo and ask your question about the game script of San Diego traveling to Buffalo. Now, I don't want to influence you, but this is going to affect, Donald Brown, Danny Woodhead, C.J. Spiller, so on and so forth. What does your crystal ball have for that game?
Yeah, that's an interesting game because I think right now you have Keenan. He certainly has he has an issue apparently with his hamstring or groin, so I want to find out a little bit from Gene how likely he is to play. But he certainly is limited if he's questionable at this stage, and so that means that you look at this Buffalo defense. They have somewhat of a pass rush that's reasonable, and then you have a team that is probably better running the football than it is throwing it, and San Diego's pass defense has played fairly well. So I think that they will test E.J. Manuel. Even with Melvin Ingram out, I think that they can get to the quarterback. So when you look at that, it means that San Diego is going to have an opportunity to run. I think that Donald Brown can have a decent game this week. I think that they will be able to use him and Danny Woodhead in ways to test those linebackers. And I think that they're guys that I would consider starting as flex plays. Then when you're looking at the likes of Malcolm Floyd, Antonio Gates, the middle of the field, I would say that I would continue to go to Gates as a big player. I would say Floyd also looks good for you. I'm not as confident in Ladarius Green right now, basically because we haven't seen much in terms of targets with him. But if this is a week for him to get on track, this would be it, I would say. So I would say that Rivers is in line for at least a low-end QB1 fantasy day. And I think that Malcolm Floyd has a chance to be in a low-end quarterback wide receiver 2 fantasy day. Donald Brown and Danny Woodhead, I would say also running back 2 flex-oriented looks. And excuse me, Antonio Gates, I think he's going to score this week. I think that he'll be a strong tight end 1 play.
And just real quick, I want to ask whether this kind of thinking appeals to you or not, Matt, because one of the things I've seen floating around, and I'll admit that instinctively this made sense to me. So when I'm projecting Buffalo and San Diego this weekend, I am giving this a little bit of weight, but I want to know if it makes sense to you. The idea that San Diego summoning up the effort to have basic near flawless game against Seattle last week, traveling east, going into a Buffalo environment, which is one of the tougher places to play. I mean, it's not New Orleans, Seattle level toughness, but it is ask Miami. It's a tough place to play. Do you see that as if we were projecting likelihoods of how this game's going to go, the San Diego letdown, and Buffalo trying to go 3-0? This is a hungry team. Does that appeal to you, or do you think that's overthinking it?
I think it has appeal to me when I look back on a game and say this is how it played out and this is how they behaved on the field. But me trying to predict the behavior of 60 players and how they were feeling on the plane and reading the tea leaves of how much sleep they got and how they were feeling and all that kind of thing. And and as a Seattle homer, I do have to say I think that the Seahawks on the road in that blistering heat were probably it was probably surprisingly hot for them, and sure. I think that was part of an issue in hindsight that I could look at. I wouldn't have looked at it in foresight and said, well, it's going to be pretty hot in San Diego. I don't know if they're going to be able to handle that as well as the Chargers who've been practicing that. But when you watch the game and see that Lynch wasn't in for much of the game, it was sweltering out there, and the stadium thermometer read 143 degrees at one point, apparently. If I heard that correctly, it sounds unbearably hot, and certain, you look at that situation, you go, well, that's how that happened. But trying to predict that, I try and look at the scheme and look at the talent of the players and their health and leave it at that.
And going to that game, Gene, Keenan Allen, groin injury. We often talk about hamstrings as something that really worries us with receivers. We don't want to see them go too early. We don't want to see them aggravated. How close to, on the sort of, no problem, to, yeah, even though he's playing, don't feel like you're out of the woods with a groin injury? And again, also, and by the way, I just want to say this. This is one of the big differences between Matt and Gene and myself. And Matt and Gene will always say, well, that's something I really can't know. So if you want to know my answer, I'll give you my answer, but know that I can't know that. It reminds me of a philosophy professor I had in college. We were studying Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, he started the first day and said, none of us can understand what Kant was trying to say. Okay, let's get that out of the way and let's talk about this book. Matt and Gene are like that. I, on the other hand, will happily pretend that I can predict the behavior of 60 football players. So with that in mind, Gene, with Keenan Allen in this groin, and just teasing out all the different levels to it, playing him today, affecting him for the rest of the season, what we know about it so far, or not the rest of the season, but in upcoming games. What's your file say on Allen and his groin right now? Does
that mean you're not going to let me get away with saying I don't really know?
No, but it's assumed. I mean, it's like it's assumed. It's just like that first day of class. We're saying none of us really know. So let's talk about it.
Can I say ask Matt? Can I phone a friend?
Always. Oh, yeah. There you go.
So no. So and I'm being partially facetious here, but that's really the truth. In this case, we don't know much. Oh, yes. Hook it up, man. It's not hooked up. I can't call you if it's not hooked up. The do you actually use that when you talk over Google? Have you ever put that together? And
I've tried it on my laptop once because it was still in my laptop case from when I got it in Vegas, and I hadn't left, so I said, I need to try this sucker out, and I think I did call you on it one time, but I didn't tell you.
Did it work?
Yeah, it actually does work.
Might make me look a little bit more official. Yeah, at least I got rid of my Princess Leia headphones. So.
While we're on the subject really quick, a friend of mine from high school, Tim Norquist, back in Bentleyville, PA, Bentley Bentworth, class 93, he actually took one of those handsets and he hollowed it out and cut out a little smartphone-shaped hole. So it's just like you're holding a handset to your head, but you got your smartphone in there. Brilliant. Market that. $1 million idea. Is Keenan Allen going to be worth $1 million for our fantasy teams, Gene?
Segue, yes. Stop stalling and answer the question. I think we're okay with Keenan Allen today, but really all we were told was that he was back in full gear on Friday. I can't find any mention of what was said about Keenan Allen in the post-practice press conferences on Friday. There wasn't anything that came out Saturday, and there's nothing as yet on Sunday. I think that's enough for me to gently expect that he's on the more probable side of questionable than doubtful. But a midweek leg strain in a wide receiver puts a guy at high risk of not only being inactive, but having a in-game setback. So I think you drop Keenan Allen a tier. You expect that his floor is a little bit more probable than his ceiling, but I think he's a good enough player, and Phillip Rivers is throwing the ball well enough right now that I think you can trust him as a wide receiver 3 or maybe even a little bit more. But unlike A.J. Green, where I would say consider only somebody in the top 15 over him, I would probably drop that to the top 25 or 30 with Keenan Allen. So if you're looking at a guy, I don't know if I want to go so far as a Brandon Cooks, but a player that you think might have a couple of touchdown upside in the right situation, maybe you go with that upside over Keenan Allen today. I think people think Mike Wallace and Sammy Watkins are those two guys who I would definitely play over Keenan Allen today. But I kind of get the sense that the fantasy world has elevated those guys up into that mid wide receiver 1, early wide receiver 2 tier at this point. So that may be taking it a little bit too far. But maybe you can, Bloom, you can give a sense of guys in that 15 to 25 range where you definitely start over Allen. Because, again, I think the risk of an aggravation is there. It really sounds like he's going to be active today. Thankfully, it's an early game, so we'll know for sure. But once he's confirmed that he's inactive, then you've got to kind of make this decision among which tier do you think with Allen.
Right, and I have Allen wide receiver 19, but again, within mere fractions of points from Keenan Allen, especially in non-PPR. I'm glad you brought up touchdowns, Gene. Guys like Cordero Patterson and Jeremy Maclin and T.Y. Hilton and Kelvin Benjamin, Brandon Cooks. I mean, these are players that, especially non-PPR setup, you might want to go away from Keenan Allen today. In PPR, you might be a little more inclined to play Keenan Allen. And one of the things that I think is a little bit worrisome about Allen is, again, with Malcolm Floyd out there, with Antonio Gates finding the fountain of youth, we saw Keenan Allen as a true number 1 receiver for the Chargers last year. And when I say number 1 receiver, I know these terms have different meanings for different people that use them. This is what I mean. He is your number 1 option in just about every situation, and he can play all the levels of the field. You know, he can be a receiver you set up to run after catch. He can be a receiver who runs those routes and creates separation in the intermediate zone of the field, and he's a downfield receiver too. I think we're only seeing him in the short and intermediate zone more often, a lot more crossing routes, and I think that the groin injury is only going to enhance that limited role compared to what he was last year. And it's not a statement on Keenan Allen's ability as a player. He's just as good as that number 1 receiver that we saw him play last year, maybe even better, but the team doesn't have to ask him to do that now. So it limits his upside. So I do think that you might break ties against Keenan Allen, specifically in non-PPR leagues today. That's something where you might not like him as much. I want to run down really quick some other things that we might not drill down on, but some things to monitor. Actually, I'm going to give you one to drill down on really quick, Gene. Dez Bryant. Now, last year in Dez Bryant, I remember in the second half of the year when his back issues were coming up, Gene, we were talking about, well, is it time to try to swap Dez Bryant for A.J. Green or swap him for Demaryius Thomas or Antonio Brown and just offload this risk from your roster? Now, that was maybe a more salient question with the playoffs coming up, but at the same time, is it time to start asking that question about Dez Bryant? And does the fact that we're asking it in week 3 make the answer clearer?
Yeah, it's time to ask that question. It has just as much to do with Tony Romo as it does Des Bryant, I think. I think we're starting to see that, some of you who have been following us for a while, we had a discussion in the second or third week of the preseason about not really knowing if Tony Romo's inaccurate throws were due to his back problems or just some miscommunication in the routes that were being run. And I don't see that Tony Romo is throwing ducks necessarily, but I think it's pretty clear, and he continues to be listed on the injury report with a back issue, that this is something that's still bothering him. Des Bryant's shoulder isn't a huge concern for me. We've seen him with other injuries try to play through him. He'll come out for a series, he'll come out for a few plays, go back in, entirely thrash a defensive back in the red zone and score. So I would not be panicking on Des Bryant necessarily, but I think the weekly floor is going to be a little bit lower because they may be missing some connections downfield, and you may see Des Bryant miss 5 to 10 offensive snaps a game. That's enough for me to I got a question this morning. Would you trade Des Bryant and Rashad Jennings for Calvin Johnson? Yes. I would not be moving Des Bryant for the tier below that, but if you can turn him into Calvin Johnson, Julio Jones, even A.J. Green at this point by throwing in a little bit of something, even if it's something nice from your depth, then I think I would do that. I wouldn't panic on Des Bryant yet, but there are enough signs there, not related to what's going on with the shoulder yet, that if you can upgrade him to another receiver in that same elite tier, go ahead and do so.
Couple of things coming across Twitter right now. Adam Schefter saying Shane Vereen expected to play. Again, a boom-bust play. We had a game script last week that was a blowout, and Vereen wasn't a very useful play. We were expecting a blowout today. That being said, Belichick. So, Jerry Atochu. And Matt, I feel like you and I have spent a lot of time talking about Jerry Atochu. We were watching him, and now, our guy Melvin Ingram is on IR recall, but Atochu is a game-time decision against the Bills today. That's according to Michael Gelkin, a great Union Tribune reporter. And always important, by the way, I'm going to do a quick PSA. I want to be a little bit sanctimonious here because I do that sometimes. We know that we are not, with a few exceptions, there are some people in the fantasy football industry that have sources, truly have sources. And I try to point that out when I have them on, guys like Lance Zierlein and Paul Charchian and so on. But on Sunday mornings, when you're saying, this player's doubtful, or give a nod to the person that you got that information from. We know it's not coming directly from you. Anyway, coming directly from us are our takes. And I want to quickly go over some quick injury things to touch on, and then I want to get some takes in as always. It feels, man, I wish we had more hours to do this. Hakeem Nicks has an illness. We're going to watch to see what happens with him. Dante Moncrief, release the Moncrief. Of course, it's Pep Hamilton, so the wings will be clipped anyway. We're going to watch St. Louis starting quarterback Austin Davis. Shaun Hill, yes, I might actually be starting Austin Davis in a game. And speaking of Austin, Tavon Austin, even though it was originally forecast he might miss multiple weeks, at least questionable for this week. Something else to watch in Dallas is Joseph Randle had a concussion, and Ryan Williams, I still think that if DeMarco Murray were to go down, that Ryan Williams could well be the most valuable running back to own in Dallas. They have him on the practice squad. They really like him. We're going to watch Kyle Rudolph with an abdomen situation. He did look banged up to me as the game went on last week, so I'm not sure how much I like him, although he could get a lot of targets in a catch-up game script for them. Tonight, Pittsburgh and Carolina. Jericho Cotchery is questionable, probably more on the doubtful side of questionable. Of the two, between he and Jason Avant, who's also questionable, DeAngelo Williams, also somebody that is questionable. And I guess, Gene, let me toss you that three-pack of Panthers, because you might be making decisions about Jonathan Stewart now versus players where you don't know Stewart is going to have to contend with DeAngelo Williams. So if somebody is making that kind of choice right now, what do you have? What light can you shed on that?
I think Jonathan Stewart is the guy to play this week. DeAngelo Williams, the same situation happened in Carolina yesterday as happened with Baltimore yesterday. They elevated a running back from the practice squad after not practicing DeAngelo Williams until Friday, likely seeing what he looked like in the locker room on Saturday, noticing that he's not any better and maybe even a little bit worse after the Friday practice, brought the practice squad player up. I think that means that DeAngelo Williams is going to be inactive today. Even if he is active, I think it's not necessarily in case of emergency break glass situation, but it's going to be clear, especially as well as Stewart looked over the past couple of weeks, that Stewart is going to get the vast majority of carries today. So I've been avoiding Williams no matter what, and it wouldn't make me shy away from Stewart so much. I'm not ready to say that he's a clear running back 2 yet, but he's definitely a flex play, I think, in probably just about any situation today, given that Steeler front struggling a little bit off and on and the way Stewart looked breaking tackles last week. I'm comfortable using Stewart in most situations.
On the road, Steelers prime time. They're going to be up for them. Last one, Gene, on the injury front, and then maybe we can have a few 11 Eastern to just talk some preview, some outlook. We are hearing that Brandon Marshall, Alshon Jeffrey expected to play, and yes, there is always something could happen in warm-up, something could happen on the airplane, who knows, but barring something unforeseen, after we saw them much shakier going into last week and playing, are these guys that you plug into your lineup regardless of the questionable designation? And I want you to talk about Eric Decker too, who's not nearly as clear of a picture as Marshall and Jeffrey.
So I think Decker is pretty clear. I think Decker is unlikely to play. He may be active, but he's not going to be healthy. And I would rather have the Chicago side of this equation than the Jets side of this equation. So if you're looking at a difference between Jeffrey and Decker, and you may be because both of these guys, you're worried about snap count, you're worried about effectiveness, you're worried about in-game aggravation, I would much rather have Cutler Marshall next to Alshon Jeffrey than I would Geno Smith and whatever else is going on in New York right now, Chris Ivory and otherwise. So I would be avoiding Decker. There's no viable hedge there. I'm not playing Santonio Holmes. I don't see anybody with the Jets that I'd like. I would just avoid Decker. And if
Jeremy
he comes
Curley,
back,
man.
Okay, Jeremy Curley, you're correct. So if you want to wait on Eric Decker, knowing that Jeremy Curley is your other option, okay. But I would imagine that most of you guys have better options than Jeremy Curley that you can use in a wide receiver 3 or a flex spot. Maybe I'm wrong about that. PPR leagues, yes, Jeremy Curley, you're right. But I would avoid the Decker situation. I don't think I would wait for him and hope for the best there. Alshon Jeffrey didn't look right. I still think there's some issues to be concerned about with him, but I would trust him in my lineups this week, knowing that you've got a little bit lower floor. If the choice is between Jeffrey and Allen, I would probably err on the side of Allen. D. Milliner is still out for the Jets. The secondary is an issue. Jay Cutler has been hot. Alshon Jeffrey, who could not run last week, was making cornerbacks and decent cornerbacks bite on double routes and almost being successful doing it. So even though he didn't hit on any of those routes, he drew 2 or 3 pass interference penalties. And if you can do that at 75%, I think against the secondary that the Jets are going to run out there this week, assuming they can protect Jay Cutler well enough, Alshon Jeffrey is a much better play this week than last. The ceiling is there for him. Brandon Marshall, I have no concerns about. Go ahead and put him in your lineup. He could have a huge week.
And right now, Eric Williams from covering the San Diego Chargers for ESPN says Keenan Allen not out on the field this morning. So watch this one. Matt, I want to do something kind of fun with you now that we've and Gene, tremendous work. I mean, seriously, we gush about Gene, but this job, when you sign up for what Gene signs up for, you don't necessarily foresee what has been going on in the first 3 weeks, and always on top of these things for us. And even if the answer is I can't know for sure, giving us some kind of answer instead of just shrugging your shoulders. Matt, you might want to just shrug your shoulders. I'm going to do something fun. Try to do something fun with you right now, okay? Because I know, and you're not going to try. Yeah, that's right. Get that arm warmed up. Get the bullpen catcher out there. I know you're not going to be like me, and you're not going to get into voodoo and trying to psychoanalyze a team. I won't just psychoanalyze people from afar that I've never met. I'll psychoanalyze a whole team. Maybe you won't do that, Matt. But I want to just.
I enjoy that. I enjoy listening to you do it too.
Well, I appreciate that, even though I'm just kind of, I speak out of all of my orifices. But I do want to ask you, I want to just step through these and give Dr. Gene a chance to catch his breath, and thank us always, guys, for going a little bit overtime with me. I want to just, it's not quite word association. You can give me more than a word. But again, the idea being, like, what does your crystal ball see for these games? It can be a player that you think is going to have a good game, or some question that you want to see answered in the game. And I want to just step through each one. I'm just going to toss these at you, and I want to just see what pops into your head when I say this matchup, all right? So we'll start. Baltimore at Cleveland.
Cleveland's running game running through Baltimore, and whether that can hold up, whether they are as good as they looked, or whether that was Pittsburgh and New Orleans talking.
Yeah, and I think that we'll have to watch that again tonight with Jonathan Stewart and Pittsburgh's defense. What about the Packers traveling to Detroit?
I would say is Matt Stafford, is Detroit going to be Detroit and look like Detroit in Detroit, which is, that's, as you can see, that's what it's all about. Is are they the Detroit Lions when they're in Detroit, and are they the the Midwestern Kitties when they're away? And I think that we saw a little bit of that in Carolina. So I am curious about how good this passing game's going to look again against Green Bay, and I have a feeling that's going to be a big week for them, and that's going to be our answer.
So somebody said, I got a feeling, Matt, I got a feeling about Davante Adams in this one. What would you tell him?
I tell you that feeling is probably something that you can take care of with something pharmaceutical or something in the refrigerator, or maybe a nap. If you're fussy like Dr. Gene, then you could, see, there you go. Just anything like that, because look, I know that Davante Adams is a very exciting college player who does a great job on fade routes. He's good on slant routes. He's obviously played well enough to take targets away from a receiver like Boykin, who they said a lot of good things about, leading up to the season, and now suddenly he drops one pass, and they want to get the rookie in there. Again, he's a rookie. He doesn't run great routes. And Aaron Rodgers throws to the guy who gets open, as he said to Jermichael Finley year after year after year, until Finley finally figured that out just in time for him to get hurt. So I look at this and I'll say he's the ultimate boom-bust play, and if you're thinking about him right now, you better not have anybody better than Jeremy Curley in that lineup. Just another little dig to you, Chase Stewart. There we go.
We can never take enough shots at Chase. Because we love him. We always hurt the ones we love. And happy birthday, Carlton. Happy birthday, Clayton Gray. Maybe he and Keith Overton, the unsung heroes, and Doug Drennan, the unsung heroes of footballguys.com.
Before we go, I would like to do I need to get my can of Lone Star beer and do my Matthew McConaughey voodoo
drinking
thing kind of going on, but I'll do that for next week.
Are you going to take your shirt off?
Nah, he doesn't do that.
A pretty good time to go ahead and take your shirt off.
I might grow my hair long again, though.
Yeah, and grease it up a little. Get it a little bit stringy. Don't wash it for a couple of days.
About 2 weeks in the film room in about February, and we'll be good to go.
What we need to do, Matt, is we need to do the Matthew McConaughey scale of quality of fantasy football play. So, all the way over here is all right. And then if you're should I start a banged up Arian Foster? Time is a flat circle. We got to come up with some of the things in between.
Or naked playing bongos, or day drinking in a police office.
Call the cops or invite your friends.
Yeah. Or flowers face down in front of your partner's door.
I do want to ask you, and I wasn't done getting your insight. I want to go just a couple minutes. I do want to ask you, Matt, because you can tap out of this one and recuse yourself because of the hat you're wearing. But what do you see, both of you guys? I want to get this talk because there's so much going on in the NFL on and off the field. There's so much going on with fantasy football with injuries, but we haven't really got a chance to take this beautiful, glowing, wonderful thing we're going to get to see today. Denver going to Seattle. As I said on the preview show, one of the things we love about following football so closely is we do get a chance to say, well, what would happen if we did it again, but change this and change this and change this? So we have a chance to say that today. Now, it is up in Seattle. It's not a neutral site, so that's running against Denver. But we know from the Super Bowl, Matt, we have a very, very wide range of outcomes for this Super Bowl rematch. What do you expect to see? What are you watching for? What's one key matchup? Anything you want to toss out here this is unbelievably fascinating. In terms of football fascination, this should overshadow basically everything else this week by a large margin.
Yeah, it should be a fun game, and I would joke that maybe Peyton Manning's going to pull a Muhammad Ali and Miles Davis and have basically made sure that he is ready for this game in ways that those guys always recommend about what you don't do the night or the week before leading up to the big match. So maybe Manning won't go there this week, but I would say that when it comes to this particular game, I know that he's been looking forward to this game probably since he got blown out, because he's a hyper-competitive guy, and you've heard him talk about this. And the Broncos' excuse, and I will call it an excuse because I'm leaving my fan hat on, is that with a faster defense and if we had all the healthy players we should have, it would have been a much different outcome. Well, maybe that will be the case, but I would say that Percy Harvin wasn't exactly the complete picture of health either. So I think this is going to be a closer game. I don't think it's going to be a blowout, but I do think the same. The big test that I'm looking for is whether Julius Thomas can handle physical coverage, because that was the one thing that Seattle really worked hard on being able to do, or like really keyed on, and it was successful because he could not handle it, and Peyton Manning tried to throw it downfield and couldn't. I will say this: Emmanuel Sanders is better than Eric Decker. So as a result of that, now it may be more of a challenge for the Seattle defense to say, yeah, go ahead and try and throw it downfield and beat us, because we're gonna keep giving you we're gonna keep taking that away. We're gonna take that away and make you go to the short stuff and make Peyton Manning, basically be impatient. And that's how they won that game. And so this week, I think Peyton Manning's going to say, I don't care. I will be as patient as I need to be in this game. And Seattle has been able to, they have been run on so far. I don't think they've been great against the run. So looking at it in this fashion, as long as the youth and the maybe less of the experience with Denver doesn't implode in the loud environs of Seattle, then you're probably going to look at a close game. But if they get taken out of their game early on, then you might end up in a situation where it could be a blowout early.
Okay, so that's a lot of if it coulds. Stick your neck out, Matt. What happens here? Is this going to be something closer to a back-and-forth battle? Does Denver have the upper hand, or does Seattle show Denver, yeah, we still got your number?
All right, well, I'll start with my mind tells me that it's going to be a blowout, and it's going to be Seattle winning this by about 3 touchdowns. But my gut tells me that it's going to be like a 7 to 10 point game, and I will say it's probably going to be Seattle still.
Gene, there's a lot of nerve endings in your gut. We can think with our gut. I think that the gut is underrated as a source of thinking. Your gut, your brain, your pieces of paper, your computer, anything you want to appeal to, just as a fan of football and as somebody who watches and thinks about football a lot. Denver, Seattle, let's look at this little jewel and watch the light get caught inside of it.
Yes, there's a lot of nerve endings in the gut. I don't know how good they are. When they start firing, you don't feel too good with them. But I think 3 touchdowns for Seattle is a little bit much here. I hope it's a little bit closer game. Yeah, I do. I think it's a little bit much. But I don't know. I think you can, again, ifs and buts and coulds and whatevers. But I think you make an argument for this game going in any of the 4 ways, blowout either way or close game either way. I think the key here is whether or not Von Miller is healthy enough and DeMarcus Ware can get to Russell Wilson comfortably. There's issues with the run defense with Denver, so if Seattle does get out to an early lead, that may be difficult. But if this gets to be a shootout, I think that the pass rush is different than what we've seen in Denver over the past couple of years. And if it's healthy enough to get to Russell Wilson, and teams have flushed Russell Wilson out of the pocket where he's good, but that puts some stress on the offense a little bit. So you got Marshawn Lynch's back issues, which I don't think are a big deal. We've got some bigger pass rush capability in secondaries, a little bit better than what Seattle faced against Denver last year. I think you can throw the preseason game out the window. I think this one's going to be a little bit closer, even though it's in Seattle.
Okay, Matt, and I've got you on the hook here, so I want to get one more interesting question out. Okay, Arizona against San Francisco. Now, Bruce Arians did something I thought very interesting, similar to what Charlie Strong is doing down here in Texas, where he's kind of calling out his guys publicly and saying that this is the matchup, this is a rivalry for one team, just like Cleveland and Pittsburgh. Sorry, I'm not trying to go there, Matt, but it's only a rivalry for one team. The other team has to play, that team has to start playing up to the level of their opponent for both teams to consider it a rivalry. Arizona is a surprise 2-0 team. San Francisco showed some flaws. Can Arizona get this win? Can Arizona go into the bye, even with Carson Palmer out 2 of the 3 weeks at 3-0?
No, they can't. And I think that Stanton has played fairly well, but fairly well means he hasn't been a complete dumpster fire when it comes to decisions that he needs to make under duress, and that's where I'm really most concerned about him. But I think there's too many weapons on offense and defense for San Francisco to be able to make this and take an early lead and put this away. And if they get up early in this game, I just think that Stanton is going to end up, he's going to be like kindling, thrown, basically lit and thrown into a dumpster at that point. So yes, I just don't see the potential there, because you look at some of these teams. San Diego kind of plays up and down to its competition, so I'm not exactly, I look at them and I would say that was a great win for Arizona, but I wouldn't necessarily look at it and say that it was it was a fantastic effort and a show of their great talent. And the fact that their coach is actually calling them out like that a little bit tells you that he's also worried about this game too.
Yeah, and there you go. Add to the bulletin board, Cardinals, Matt Waldman saying, no, you can't win today. So, and it's going to be fun to watch. It's fun to watch, and again, I bring this stuff up partially because I love talking football with these guys, and I love sharing it with everyone out there. But we have all our fantasy stuff. We have our injuries. We have our good matchups and bad matchups to consider. But meanwhile, there's unbelievable dramas playing out with all of these teams, coaches, players, and big plots, epic stories every week unfolding. I don't know if we rise to the level of epic, but certainly we try to keep it entertaining and informative here. FootballGuys.com, The Audible, all the other good stuff here. Dr. Gene gives you that Sunday morning updates. Again, if you're an Insider Pro subscriber, you can watch that. He updates it as the morning goes on. All three of us are on Twitter. We're hearing, Arian Foster outside warming up his hamstring, seeing if he can go. And as always, we have all of our best information, but you have to tune in on Twitter for that last hour and a half, as we often even see things break 10 or 15 minutes before game time. And then we also have late-breaking things, sometimes like Doug Martin last week broke right before the start of the early games. So if you were wondering about Doug Martin versus whoever, or for that matter, Bobby Rainey, you did find out before the early game started last week that Doug Martin was unlikely to go. So stay tuned there. Stay tuned. Of course, you got the email updates from Joe Bryant. We got you covered. We care. And we certainly care about this great game and everything we get to witness every Sunday. We'll be back next Sunday. I really, really appreciate Dr. Gene and Matt giving me and all of you out there their valuable time on a Sunday morning. So buckle up and enjoy the ride.